So today we're going to cover the principle of polarity. The second one is principle of cause and effect, and the third one is the principle of rhythm. So let's start with the principle of polarity, and that the name gives it away. It's essentially a concept that everything has its opposite, and they're intertwined, interconnected, and inseparable, which means that light has dark, joy has sorrow, success has failure, hot has cold, close and distant. I want you here, I don't want you here. I want you near, I want you far. Life and death, they're both on the same, imagine if it's a thread, and they're actually on the opposing sides. So they're actually one and the same. And so, or they're two sides of the same coin. And so embracing this principle has us have embraced the dance of life. And so what the DiMartini method does, it helps us ask quality questions to find that balance, because sometimes we can sit in one extreme or the other, and it helps us to have a more balanced perspective of those two extremes. So how do we apply the principle of polarity into practical application? So first of all, it's about balance. So we have to recognize that life will always, and I use always purposely and intentionally, is that it will always have contrasting moments, but our mind tends to subtract, delete, filter, and want to emphasize one side because of our biases, and we are creatures of bias. And so the law of polarity, or the principle of polarity, helps us to go from this narrow viewpoint of the world, or it might be narrow because we're at this extreme of the thread, but it teaches us to have a more bigger, vaster view of life itself. So it teaches us to embrace positive and negative sides of the journey and find and seek the balance, and seek the balance in the middle. That also then in turn builds our resilience. You have to become more resilient, because then as a result, if you have challenge, and you know challenge is here, but you also know this is the same thread and you've got support on the other side, to know this is to know the other, then it teaches you to become more adaptable, teaches you this is just temporary, you're not going to stay stuck in this forever. And so it teaches you that there's more growth and transformation and opportunity. Instead of being stuck and then narrow focused and just focusing on that challenge, you then get to open up to a wider perspective and picture. So that is the law of polarity. Some of the questions that we ask inside the DiMartini method are, so what's the benefit? What would be the drawback of the opposite? That kind of helps to put it into that opposite, or find the center point. But we also have where and when do they demonstrate the opposites. So it's column 5 and 12. And so that teaches us to be flexible, to be able to see both sides as well. So there are different questions that can help with that. So the next principle of we're going to cover is the principle of cause and effect. And so this is profound because it underpins the interconnectedness of actions and their immediate consequence. So it changes this whole notion that we live in this sequential event, something happens, and then as a result, then there's something else that happens, and then the result of that. And so there is no cause and effect because it happens at the same time. And so maybe we could actually redefine that principle and call it the principle of cause effect, because it's acausal, which means that it's not one thing happens and then something else happens. It's acausal as opposed to causal. So how do we apply this law into our practical application? Well, we're learning to know that simultaneously in the same moment that both cause and effect are happening. There's no time lag. And so it's not someone did something to you and then you felt something and experienced all this thing. It happened simultaneously. So if someone is rejecting you in your perception, someone's equally accepting you in that same moment. That's acausal. When we appreciate and deeply appreciate that moment, and we transcend the cause and effect and balance it out equally in that same moment, becomes an acausal moment. And that's when we birth our love and gratitude in that moment. And that's column 13. And so what we want to do is, when we appreciate the cause effect law in this dynamic, then we can start to maybe take more accountability for our life, because we're not saying, blaming all these things, you're doing this to me, but we take more accountability and also responsibility, which gets us more empowered at the end, because we're living, this is my life and my choice and my perception, and we take more ownership of that. So we also, the part that we get to really deeply appreciate with a cause effect and know that there's no time lag is also realizing that there's symmetry, proportion, and order in the universe. Because in order for something to be balanced, we have to understand the symmetry, the proportion of it, the degree of it, and there's the deeper order. And that's what, if we get to really see that, that's what how they describe beauty. Beauty is symmetry, proportion, and order. And so then you get to experience the beautifulness of the world and the richness of the world around, which means that there's beauty in our social dynamics, there's beauty in our physical health issues, there's beauty in wars and marriages, and there's beauty in all of those things. And so it teaches us to, as we ask column 13 question, it teaches us to balance out that symmetry, proportion, and order. So we're not finding it disordered and out of symmetry, but we're balancing it together. And then spontaneously, as a result of that, you'll feel your heart open, you'll feel more greater order, and you get to play in a different space. So that is the principle of cause effect. We've renamed it. The last one we're going to cover is the principle of rhythm. And so it underscores this concept and this idea that there's a cyclical nature of life. And so that also includes for us personally. And so when we understand that there's a pendulum swinging in our life, maybe, or that there's changes inside of our life, sometimes we don't like that change, but we've forgotten this is a part of the rhythm of life, part of our growth cycle in life. Maybe we're going through a harvesting time where we're reaping all the rewards, and then there's times where we have to go and we have to get into the trenches and we have to dig really deep because we're going into cultivating the land or cultivating ourselves, and it takes effort and takes work, but that's just another rhythm and another phase of life. So it's crucial for us to be able to recognize that these are essential parts of our life and our journey, and they're going to influence us, that we're going to have influence with us. And so we want to embrace those. So rather than being critical at a phase maybe where you feel like you're just resting and you're just lower energy, maybe you can just appreciate this is a period of time in your life that you are building up energy, you're regrouping, you're redeciding what it is that you want, instead of being this attachment to productivity and go, and then resentful of the time where you're taking a break and just re-energizing yourself. So we want to take out that attachment to both sides. And so we then also want to recognize that our personal growth is not linear. We don't just go on, and you've seen that so many times before, potentially, is that linear journey of growth. It's not like that. It's kind of a bit sometimes a bit of a mess. And so when we appreciate then that principle of rhythm, we also know that this is just part of our rhythm and part of our periods of rest and reflection, and then part of our phases of action and productivity. And that's just part of our learning journey and cycle. So, and I don't know where you are in your journey in terms of your rhythm right now. I definitely feel like I've come out what seems like a little bit of a hibernation period. It actually feels like that. And I feel like I'm finally coming out. It's a bit more spring-like for me at the moment. I feel more energized, I feel more connected, and I feel more than I've ever felt before. So I think we just have to appreciate, but I also appreciate that period of time of just going inward and recultivating myself again. And so we want to incorporate these principles, the principle of polarity, the principle of cause effect, and the rhythm into our lives, so they guide us essentially to have greater wisdom and deeper understanding of this whole life experience. So they're going to help us to navigate some of the complexities and the challenges that we have in our journey. Maybe they're going to help us to find more meaning when we get stuck in one side. We can go back to that, the law of duality, the principle of duality. How does this help me right now? And so it breaks out of our mold or our mindset that we might have and helps us to transcend it so we can have a greater mindset. So it takes practice. Do you get it? Sometimes, and then it disappears, and you get it again, then disappears, and you get it for longer, and then it disappears. Yes, that's the rhythm of life, and we want to embrace that. So thank you so much for being a part of the in-depth mindset education. Hopefully you found some of this useful. Love to hear your comments and your questions. You can just share in the comments below. I look forward to seeing you flowing with life more, and I look forward to seeing you at the next perfect time.